Colonel Potter, sir, my last wish is to be buried in my mother's wedding gown.
I've seen these Dodgers for 40 years, all the tricks. Dismissed!
Imagine American television without MASH. It's tough, right? That's because the show wasn't just popular, it reshaped what a sitcom could be. Premiering in 1972, during the final years of the Vietnam War, MASH * was set in the Korean War and blended humor with heartbreak. Its quirky characters explored the absurdity of war and resilience of the human spirit. It quickly became a fan favorite. But behind the scenes, the show was constantly evolving. As it dove deeper into social commentary and complex character arcs, tensions sometimes rose. Several beloved stars eventually made the difficult choice to leave. Were their exits personal, professional, or due to creative conflicts? The reasons may surprise you. Let's take a closer look at what really happened. History of MASH, a war story told with heart. There's a lot to unpack with this one, but before we get into it, let's rewind the clock and look at how this legendary series came to life. Like many other impeccable TV series, the story of MASH begins not on television, but in a book. Back in 1968, Dr. Richard Hooker, the pen name of Korean War surgeon H. Richard Hornberger, published MASH, a novel about 3 army doctors. The novel was a fictionalized account of his time as a mobile army surgical hospital doctor during the Korean War. And thanks to its mix of gallows humor with moments of human warmth and bitter reality, the book soon became a bestseller, catching Hollywood's attention in the process. 2 years after the book was published, director Robert Altman adapted the novel into the film MASH, a satirical black comedy that was both irreverent and sobering. The film starred Donald Sutherland as Hawkeye Pierce and Elliot Gould as Trapper John, and it struck a nerve with audiences, especially as the Vietnam War loomed large in American consciousness. The film soon became a critical and commercial success, winning the Palme d'Or at Cannes and an Academy Award for Best Screenplay. But the real cultural explosion came 2 years later when CBS adapted the concept into a weekly TV show. Developed by Larry Gelbart and Gene Reynolds, the television version of MASH debuted on September 17, 1972. It kept the wartime setting and the offbeat humor but introduced a more serialized, character-driven style that allowed for deeper emotional storytelling. Alan Alda stepped into the role of Hawkeye Pierce and quickly became the heart of the series. Although the first season struggled with ratings so much so that it was nearly cancelled, CBS took a chance and moved it to Saturday nights. With this move, ratings soared. And so did the show's cultural impact. To many, the show also broke rules. It was the first of its kind in Hollywood, experimenting with format, using real war footage, and was even one of the first American comedies to regularly feature the sound of helicopters instead of a laugh track. Alan Alda, who played Hawkeye, later became a director, writer, and creative force behind the show, pushing for more realism and emotional complexity. But as MASH matured, so did its characters, and let's just say not all the actors agreed with the new direction. Some felt their roles were shrinking or becoming caricatures. Others struggled with personal challenges or felt the urge to explore different creative paths. In general, over its 11-season run, MASH saw numerous cast changes, but through it all, it remained anchored in a singular mission, to show the cost of war through the lens of compassion, wit, and unbreakable human bonds. With this in mind, let's jump right into the first major exit from the series, an actor whose departure was so unexpected, the writers chose to kill off his character in a moment that shocked the nation. McLean Stevenson. If you ask longtime MASH fans what moment hit them the hardest, chances are they'll point to the final scene of Season 3's finale, Abyssinia, Henry. It was just one line, delivered quietly by radar, but it changed everything. Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake's plane was shot down over the Sea of Japan. There were no survivors. That moment was groundbreaking, not just because it shocked audiences, but because it marked the first major departure of a core MASH cast member, McLean Stevenson. But how did we get there? McLean had been a vital part of MASH from the very beginning. As the affable, often confused commanding officer of the 4077th, his character, Colonel Henry Blake, was a perfect foil for the madness of war. Where Hawkeye and Trapper brought rebellion and wit, Henry Blake brought humanity, sometimes frazzled, sometimes clueless, but always well-meaning. In the early seasons, McClane's performance earned him widespread praise and a Golden Globe. He was funny, relatable, and deeply loved by fans. But behind the scenes, things weren't quite as harmonious. According to interviews and memoirs from the cast and writers, McClane grew increasingly frustrated with his role. While the show started as a loose ensemble comedy, it quickly began centering around Alan Alda's Hawkeye Pierce. And as Alda became more involved in the writing and direction of the show, his character took on greater emotional and narrative weight. McClane, meanwhile, felt sidelined. So sidelined that he even once told People magazine in 1975, "I want to be number one. I want to be the guy carrying the show." But as egotistical as this probably sounds, it wasn't actually about McClane's ego. You see, McClane had these big dreams of becoming a star, he had huge ambitions. But if there's one thing you should know about Hollywood, it's that it's usually very easy for an actor to fall into a stereotypical role. And for McClane, he was falling into this pit that he wanted nothing to do with. He saw how powerful television could be, and he believed he had the charisma and talent to anchor a show of his own. He wanted to pursue opportunities where he wouldn't always be the second or third banana. He wanted to be the first. So, at the end of season 3, McClane approached the producers and told them he would not be returning. Now here's where things took a turn. Traditionally, when actors left sitcoms, Henry Blake, their characters were written off gently, transferred, reassigned, and maybe even sent off to get married. But MASH wasn't a traditional sitcom. Its creators, Larry and Gene, saw an opportunity to do something bold. They wanted to remind viewers that MASH was, at its heart, a war story. That in war, not everyone makes it home. And this was the perfect opportunity. What succeeded this was the legendary Abyssinia, Henry episode. In the episode, Henry Blake receives his discharge orders and prepares to head home. There's celebration, tears, hugs, a joyful farewell. For 25 minutes, it feels like a happy ending. But then comes the final scene like a raging storm. Radar walks into the operating room, hat in hand, face grave. The doctors are mid-surgery when he breaks the news that Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake's plane was shot down over the Sea of Japan. There were no survivors. What followed? To understand what happened, we need to go back to the beginning. Wayne Rogers played Trapper John McIntyre, one half of the original comedic duo that defined MASH's early seasons. He and Alda's Hawkeye Pierce were the life of the 4077th. The chemistry between the duo was magnetic and audiences loved it. Especially when they decided to throw in their fast-paced banter, mischief, and their unshakable friendship. It was like watching a wartime version of The Odd Couple, albeit with scalpel jokes. But behind the laughs, tension was secretly brewing. As it turns out, Wayne had signed on to MASH under the impression that it would be a true ensemble show, with equal screen time for the core cast. But as the series evolved, much of the spotlight began to shift toward Alda's character. It soon became clear that Hawkeye became more than just a co-lead, he was now the moral center of the show, the emotional anchor. And soon after Alda, who was a gifted writer and director, started contributing heavily to the show's creative direction, things really started to look different. Initially, Wayne didn't mind Alda's success. On the contrary, the two were reportedly friendly off-set, but naturally, he soon began to feel sidelined. Alda's character seemed to be the only one getting some sort of maturity. The others just appeared stuck in their original cocoons. Anyway, just like that, Trapper John had gone from being a leading man to a supporting character. And as Wayne later explained in interviews, it wasn't about ego, it was about the integrity of storytelling. He once said, Trapper didn't have much to do. He was one of two buddies, and then he became the guy who nodded at everything Alan said. But unlike McClane, who made a public exit and was given a send-off, Wayne chose a different path. Quietly, and without a fuss, he decided not to renew his contract after season 3. The producers didn't even know he was officially gone until shortly before filming began for season 4. And here's where things get even more unusual. Wayne's contract with the show was never formally signed. Meaning all along, he'd been working on a handshake deal. This meant that when the producers threatened to sue him for breach of contract, they had no legal footing as he hadn't broken anything. He had simply walked away from a show he no longer believed was giving his character the space to grow. His departure was abrupt and it left the writers scrambling. As a result, they had to rework the opening of Season 4, explaining in the first episode that Trapper John had been discharged while Hawkeye was on leave. The reaction from the audience was brutal. First, Henry, and now, Trapper? Was this even real? To make matters worse, there was no farewell scene for him. No hospital party, and most importantly, no heartfelt goodbye. With the producers scrambling to do damage control, in Wayne's place came Mike Farrell as B.J. Honeycutt, a character written to be more grounded, emotionally complex, and perhaps less rebellious than Trapper. With this change, the dynamic of the show shifted immediately. Gone was the buddy comedy edge and in was a softer, more introspective version of the show. But here's the irony, MASH actually grew deeper, and arguably better, in Trapper's absence. Although many still argue that they prefer the earlier seasons, for us, we'd say the opposite. Wayne, meanwhile, didn't disappear from the spotlight. After MASH, he appeared in TV shows and films, but eventually took an entirely different path, becoming a successful financial investor and commentator. Wayne was smart. Very smart. He had studied Wayne Jones' history at Princeton and later built a career on Wall Street. In fact, by the 1990s, he was a regular panelist on Fox News Cashin' In, discussing economics and policy. He made millions, not from acting, but from savvy investing. Still, he never completely walked away from Hollywood. He did a few TV movies, took on a couple of recurring roles, and even joked about his time on